Day 944 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 645,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,400 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 16 tanks, 40 APVs, 61 artillery, and a whopping 3 air defense systems, which I'll be sure to show you some of shortly, for this frighteningly high number of Russian air defense losses. Then we'll head across to the map and we'll start out in the east of Ukraine, as Ukrainian artillery intelligence and counter-battery units have been active in the Pokrovsk direction. Activities of which that have been ramped up, aiding in significantly slowing advances of the Russian forces. Although so too has Russia, and the Russian media especially, been active, as a Russian commander was being interviewed in the Donetsk Republic of Russia. As you can see, it says it right there, talking about the AFU losing over 2,000 soldiers a day, whilst at the same time failing to provide what should amount to large swaths of examples of, for instance, destroyed Ukrainian equipment, attacks on their positions, and so on. But amongst all the brandishing of flags of a collapsed Soviet empire and internationally unrecognized annexation titles blasted on the screen, using official Russian state media like RT News as some sort of viable source of information is very questionable at best and just plain irresponsible at worst. But even so, it's always nice to get a look at where their heads are at in this war, or non-war SMO, a title that the Russian media is still trying to cram down people's throats. But as for the real activity we can see on the ground, take for example in the Kharkova direction. Because while fighting off a mechanized assault by Russian soldiers, Ukrainian defenders from the 33rd Mechanized Brigade destroyed an enemy tank and an APC, in this case using a rather rare French-German Milan ATGM. Then add to that, the nearby 46th Separate Airmobile Brigade repelled another attack in the same direction, destroying 3 tanks and 1 BMP. This event also resulted in Russian infantry being dispersed by Ukrainian FPV drones on the fields and land-ins. 3 more Russian tanks escaped from the battlefield, amounting to a 50% loss of Russian tanks from this single assault unit in a very small space of time. Which reminds me, I have a very compelling news update on the Ukrainian FPV drone technological advancement front that I'll mention soon in this video. But firstly, headed down on the map, taking a brief look at where some of the updates are for the long-time Ukrainian-held settlement of Vuhledar, where there has been a surprising amount of silence up until this hour, although Ukrainian military sources confirm that Russian units managed to enter the first outskirts of Vuhledar after the most recent months of intense fighting. So we see this front is deteriorating, though a Ukrainian source from the ground said of it, quote, "There was no major offensives as such, small enemy assault groups managed to penetrate the city, so we can conclude that at the moment there is a grey area. They enter there, cannot gain a foothold, so they either withdraw or die." Which is more or less indicative of meat wave tactics of the Russian forces. Then headed all the way up on the map, where Russian conscripts are still repeatedly being sent to the front lines of Kursk, and are not surviving, with this example of the mother who wrote an appeal to Putin, demanding an explanation as to why conscripts are still being sent to the front lines. Now, Russia's Chechen commander of the Akhmat forces, Alordanov, whose soldiers have been constantly criticized for using Russian conscripts as buffer units against Ukrainian forces, has just stated that the AFU is massively abandoning their positions in the Kursk region. Although the reality on the ground up until this point shows itself as what could be better described as a stabilization of the front lines. But once again, the Russian information space is quite the beast that needs to be tamed, with Olordanov himself being one of the most prominent offenders in bending the truth when it comes to an accurate understanding of the Kursk battlefield dynamics. Because what we did see on this front most recently was how this Russian Buk M3 was detected by a Ukrainian drone, so an air defense system, the Buk M3. As the vehicle was about to leave its position, a HIMARS rocket precisely struck its location, destroying the vehicle. And just before that event, the Buk M3 made some unsuccessful attempts to shoot down the Ukrainian reconnaissance UAV. Then also in Kursk, take for instance, a Ukrainian FPV munition flew into a Russian BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicle, causing a catastrophic ammunition detonation. Now, we already quite well know Russian tanks, as a different example, to have a flaw in their design, with the ammunition stored in their turrets leading to some hefty turret toss outcomes. But truly, it's the BMP-1s, 2s, and the 3s that are the unsung heroes when it comes to huge detonations, right after strikes pierce their relatively thin 10 to 35mm armor. Then also in Kursk, a soldier posted the outcome of a destroyed Russian BTR-82AT armored personnel carrier. Then lastly, I'll mention for Kursk, this Ukrainian quadcopter wasn't willing to give a Russian soldier any privacy when hiding in an outhouse toilet. Then taking a look around on the wider map, because somewhere in the east, Russian servicemen stated, quote, "everything burned," as they showed the consequences of the attacks on their positions. Then also, the Ukrainian military from the 77th Separate Airmobile Brigade took out a Russian Tor M2 air defense system. And this is where things really become worthy of a mention, because this Tor M2 and the previously mentioned Russian Buk M3 air defense systems are both an all-in-one standalone set of systems, each comprising of their own radar, launchers, missiles, and control systems. As for the cost, well, the Tor M2 cost roughly $25 million for the single unit, and the Buk M3 $35 million. So these are truly some staggering losses, all of which leads to a dangerously less protected Russian airspace, in turn leading to increasingly vulnerable Russian military assets, and outcomes for which we see all the time now. Russia really shouldn't want to see this war through. Then briefly onto the Russian map, and moving to the recent Russian depot catastrophes inside of Russia. Because as for a brief follow-up, the Tikhoretsk Armory in Krasnodar Krai, with that strike occurring on September 21, has later assessments indicating 80% destroyed, with most of the newer section of the base at 90% destroyed. Then it was a similar story for the Toropets depots, almost completely consumed as well. An expected 30,000 tons of ammunition just gone. Then we'll head far, far away on the map for a moment as Japanese F-35 fighter jets fired warning flares in response to a Russian Il-38 reconnaissance aircraft violating Japanese airspace over Ruben Island in North Hokkaido. And this event marks the first instance where Japan used flares to ward off an intruding aircraft. So the Russian plane breached Japan's airspace 3 times, each time for about a minute, leading to the alert, as the incident occurred during joint naval exercises between Russia and China in the Sea of Japan. The Japanese defense minister condemned the airspace violations and issued a diplomatic protest to Russia, noting it was the first such intrusion since 2019. But the fact that Japan was firing warning flares in response to a Russian aircraft violation is quite significant, as it marks an escalation in Japan's defense posture. And given that the earlier 2019 airspace violation incident was performed by a Russian Tu-95 strategic bomber instead, and by instead I mean instead of this Russian maritime patrol aircraft, it seems that Japan's response today included their own internal readjustment of how credible a threat they now see Russia as, leading them to perform a more assertive and direct deterrent. Then headed across to some news for today. So, Ukrainian President Zelensky attended a United Nations Security Council meeting just earlier today, where he emphasized the need for continued global support for Ukraine's defense against Russia. He highlighted his 5-point victory plan, which focuses on securing more military aid, rallying diplomatic support, and ensuring that Russia faces consequences for their actions. Zelensky will also share this strategy with US leaders, presidential candidates, and present it to the UN General Assembly. Then we'll head across to some Ukrainian hardware updates today, as Robert Magyar Brovdy, someone who is well known for being a Ukrainian commander of drone units, particularly recognized for his expertise and leadership in deploying advanced unmanned aerial systems in combat operations against Russian forces, has stated in a recent interview that during the next 6 to 8 months, humans will no longer be needed to control drones in Ukraine. Going on to explain that AI technologies are rapidly evolving and will soon handle targeting and operations independently. So the development and deployment of fully autonomous drones controlled by AI could be a significant game changer in the war against Russian aggression, as it would drastically reduce the need for human operators and make warfare much faster, more precise, and less reliant on human decision-making on the battlefield. Now, it is true to say that autonomous AI identification and targeting already exists in early Ukrainian test cases on the battlefield. And so, based on this latest update, those early results are looking promising and terrifying. Then headed across to a really tiny Russian military mobilization blunder segment, as the Kremlin seems to be shifting its decentralized regional volunteer recruitment campaigns into a more centralized federal effort. This move likely reflects difficulties in meeting the manpower demands of the war in Ukraine, despite claims that the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk had boosted recruitment figures for Russia. And so it seems that the Kremlin may believe that consolidating recruitment efforts will provide better control and improve overall rates, as regional campaigns have been underperforming. But Russia's attempt to micromanage volunteer recruitment by centralizing efforts reflects a desperate move to control its dwindling manpower supply, with this top-down approach only likely to exacerbate existing problems, as it always does, as imposing stricter oversight from the Kremlin may stifle local initiatives and just end up creating further inefficiencies. Not to mention, the problem can't be really that much helped for Russia, given that the general Russian public is cluing in on the fact that if you go to Ukraine, you stay in Ukraine. Then headed across to a super quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So I'll start you off with a question for this one. Do you know any country other than Russia where people celebrate the opening of a new outhouse toilet and decorate them with balloons? Nope, neither do I. And look at this luxury they speak of. They say, here's the bench for rest, and wash your hands please. This is Russia in 2024, celebrating an outhouse crapper. You could have been so much more Russia, but you ended up with an outdoor crapper, complete with a stolen porcelain toilet from Ukraine. Now, I can't confirm that last statement, but the fact that that's even possible is just not a good look for Russia. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue the likes, the comments, the support, all of that really helps keep the channel going, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!